Hey everybody, I'm Two-Tone.
I'm Mitch the Peach.
Welcome back to the Hills Are Silent podcast, where we chop it up about the games of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Let's get into it. What's going on, Mitch? What have you been playing lately?
Man, I've been knocking out games, and I am thrilled
Sweet.
at the games that I'm sharing today,
Sweet.
especially the first one.
All right.
So I finally, as I told you last week, I was 50 hours in. I finally beat Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch. And I beat it in a total, I think it was a little over 55 hours. So I told you I was
Oh,
close
you were
to
right at
beating
the
it.
end then. Okay, cool.
I was right at the end. And I have to report, it's one of the better JRPGs I've ever played. I honestly loved it. It it's developed by Level 5, which I'm not sure if you recognize any of the titles that they have aside from Ni no Kuni, but there's Professor Layton, which is a lot of 3DS games. I think
Okay.
it's more
Yeah, I'm
like a
familiar with that franchise. Yeah.
and then Yokai Watch, which is almost a Pokemon adjacent type of game that's also on 3DS. I know a lot of them
Okay.
are.
I've never heard of that one. That one sounds interesting. Have you
I
played that
played
one?
one of them. I've played, I think it's Yokai Watch 2, something like that. But they're very similar to Pokemon, where they have like two versions, like a red and blue type scenario.
Mm.
And there is like catching monsters and, the typical Pokemon
Oh, so
stuff.
it's like straight up a Pokemon clone.
Yeah,
I can't believe
it's
I've never heard of that. So it's a whole series too. It's not just one game.
it's a whole series. Yeah, there's multiple. I think they were just more. They didn't come over to the States until way later. They were more in, I think, Japan beforehand, and never really came over here and got localized until, I don't know, way after Pokemon did. So they're okay games. But I only played one for a bit, and I don't think I even beat it. So I mean, obviously it's hard to beat Pokemon.
Yeah.
But back to Ni no Kuni. Yeah, developed by Level 5. It's very much a JRPG. I mean, it is what that every JRPG does. It's got the ton of side quests. It's a lot of grinding, obviously, 55 hours in. I mean, it was a ton of gameplay. The bosses are, it's a lot of grinding to get to the next boss to make sure you're ready for it. Because if you're not, then you just get your ass kicked, and then it's no fun. So you have to put the hours in just to grind. And the
Hmm.
game itself, I mean, as I said with Yokai Watch, it reminds me a lot of Pokemon as well.
Oh, okay.
So the battle but I think it's way more interesting than Pokemon as far as like the design of like the bosses, or the, the story itself is very interesting. But you capture creatures, and they call them familiars, and you tame these creatures if you defeat them in battle and they want to join you. It's just random chance they join you.
Hmm.
Um, and you have three, but the battle system is cool. It's way different than Pokemon. So Pokemon's obviously turn-based. You pick a move,
Yeah.
they hit the other Pokemon. In this, it's more of like a free flow battle style, where it's like an open field, and you're running around. You're controlling one of the three characters that you can play as, and essentially it's almost like a Final Fantasy VII scenario, where you cast spells. You can bring out those familiars who are kind of like the Pokemon and use their spells and battle with them. But it's more interactive, and it's not just like sitting there and punching. Okay, let's use Fireball, and then they shoot a fireball. But no, it's like literal. You're running around the map, like I said, like a Final Fantasy VII type of battle system.
Hmm. Is it random battle encounters, or do you actually see the enemy on the map? Like, can you avoid battles if you want to?
You can avoid battles if you want to. You can see the enemy, but when you're lower level, the enemies typically can catch up to you pretty fast. So it's sometimes hard to avoid them. But as you're like, if you say you're over leveled in the area that you're in at the time, the enemies will actually just start running away from you.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I'm looking at the video right now. Is some cool character design, and it looks like
Oh,
some scenes are animated. Are the cutscenes fully
yes.
animated?
Yes. Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned that. They're very almost like we talked about with Persona 5 last
Yeah.
week. they look very similar to that, and some of the animated cutscenes, they're beautiful. I mean, the story is great, and then adding that layer onto it just made me obviously keep with the grind. I put that 50 plus hours in. It's quicker than most JRPGs I play.
Man, I really regret passing up on this game. I think I told you that I've seen this game in stores for like $5 on multiple occasions. I always pick it up and go, it's probably a good game. I'll get it next time. Now
It was always on my radar as well, and then it came to Game Pass, and I decided to give it a try, and I'm really glad I did. The second one is actually coming to Game Pass sometime this year, so when that comes out, I'm 100% playing the second one.
Okay, cool. Wait, is that one already released? It just hasn't.
Yes, already released. Hasn't come to Game Pass yet, though.
Okay, got it. Cool, man.
Yeah. Other than that, I just looking at it. I mean, it got a lot of good publicity when it was released. I looked it up, and it's like the 30th best-selling PlayStation 3 game of all time.
Oh, wow.
Which I think, top 30. That's pretty good. There's a lot of good PlayStation 3 titles.
Yeah, that's really good.
Cool. But yeah, that's Ni no Kuni. I mean, I love it. The story, the design, the battle system. JRPGs are a grind. They're always going to be a grind. But if there's a good mechanics for battling and there's good story, you're gonna loop me in every time. I'm gonna put the hours in.
Okay, cool.
So my other game, which I know you're excited for me to talk about, and
yeah.
I hope I don't burst a bubble here because I wasn't super impressed with it, is High on Life.
Okay.
Which is created by Justin Roiland, who is the co-creator of Rick and Morty, and it's developed under Squanch Games, which Justin is the founder of. So it's a shorter game. It took me about 8 hours, 9 hours to beat it, which I liked after coming off of a 50+ hour JRPG. It was the perfect. It was the perfect game to go into next. It's a first-person action adventure shooter where essentially you get 5 guns, and all these guns can talk to you. That's the whole gimmick of the game. They're guns that talk, and one of them is voiced by Morty, the character, whoever voices Morty in Rick and Morty. And I'm gonna tell you right now, the guns are really annoying, and it's unfortunate.
Do they repeat the same lines over and over and over again, or is the dialogue continuously different?
Sometimes they repeat. There's a lot of dialogue though, and they have a lot of options of what the guns say, and the guns talk. They're really the main characters more than you, the player.
Yeah.
But some of the overall, I have a lot to say about the humor of the game. Some of it is very stale. They really try to force some humor that it just doesn't land for me. I thought I would find myself laughing more at some of the stuff that they put in because Rick and Morty, I enjoy the Rick and Morty, TV show, but a lot of it just didn't hit for me, and they really wanted to force some stuff down, and some of the lines were just way too long, and they just force you to listen to this really elongated joke that wasn't really funny.
Dang.
Some of it was good, don't get me wrong. I thought some of them were very clever and funny. It just didn't all land for me. And I think the other thing where they really thought they were the other thing they thought they were funny about is that they were very self-aware of they made sure that the game was self-aware of itself. So there's a point where they make you shoot a little alien kid, and then afterward the gun goes, oh, there goes our E for everyone rating, you just killed a kid. Which
hey,
okay. Yeah, it is kind of funny, but I don't know, there's some other ones where they're self-aware of I think they mention a couple I don't know if it was Kotaku or Game Informer or something, but they talk about, oh, our review's going to be really bad or something from Kotaku or whatever. So some of the self-aware stuff, it can be funny, but overall as a whole, I just think they're just trying to shove too much, comedy down your throat, and the gameplay didn't really back it up.
That's what I was wondering.
Gameplay wise, it just didn't. I'll keep it short. It didn't. When I'm playing a first person shooter, when I kill someone, I want to feel, I want to feel good doing it, and if
I
that
want to
makes
feel good killing
sense.
people.
Yeah.
I totally understand.
So the best thing I can compare it to is Wolfenstein games. Like when I kill a Nazi, like I am so happy. Like I love like to be able to just sit there and kill the Nazi, and like, the way they die
Yeah.
in those games is great. Like especially those recent ones.
Yeah.
In High on Life, all these aliens, there's not a ton of difference between each alien
Mm.
as far as like the waves of aliens that keep coming at you. But when they die, they kind of just fall over. There's no like, and when you're shooting them, they just like glow red and then fall over. There's no like exploding or like there's chunks of them coming off when you're shooting them.
Yeah, I totally understand that because a big thing in any game, but especially first person shooters, is that like visceral feedback of like, man, I'm really doing damage. I was actually thinking about that the other day. So, the Far Cry series, the very first Far Cry game, to this day, I still remember the feedback feeling of that game because that was one of the early games that had ragdoll physics, and it was a gorgeous game at the time. It's the graphics still look really good even to this day. But when you would shoot enemies in that game, I don't know, they just felt like they actually had heft and weight to them. It wasn't realistic by any means, but like the enemies would kind of flinch and just blood would splatter out of them, and then when you finally killed them, they just like oh and fall over. It's like you were shooting these like tanks of enemies, even though they're just humans. Although there are monsters at the end of that game. And yeah, Wolfenstein, very satisfying shooting mechanics. Any game that has jibs where enemies are just falling apart, you're blowing off limbs, like I love that. That's exciting. But if it's just a game where it's the same animations over and over again, or it just doesn't feel like your shots are like blasting them away, and it can be kind of a boring first person shooter experience.
That's really what I to tie it all together. That's really what it was for me. It was forced comedy on top of mediocre gunplay, and I think for it being on Game Pass and only being 9 hours long, like I don't regret playing it. I think everybody should give it a try. Some of like the gun designs are very clever, and the abilities that some of these guns have are pretty clever. And there's some funny moments. Like I'm not gonna bash this game completely. I finished it. I don't regret finishing it, but I would not pay full retail price for it. I think it being on Game Pass was the perfect, was perfect for me.
Yeah. So as far as related games, I did play the Rick and Morty VR game a few years back. I didn't finish it, but that game was actually pretty entertaining from what I did play of it. So I don't know how it stands up against this game, but I would recommend at least trying that one. And the studio, I don't know if it was Squanch Games, but it was that same what's the guy's name? Justin Roiland.
Yeah,
He also worked on another game called Trover Saves the Universe, which is another VR game. I don't know. I think you can play
that
it.
is under Squanch.
Okay. I think you can play that either in VR or not in VR. I don't think it's exclusively a VR game. But I have that game. It's in my massive backlog, and I wonder how that one is because I've been meaning
Yeah,
to try that one.
I'm interested to it. Yeah, overall, I'd say you should give it a try. I think it's unique. They do some things, but I don't think you're not going to be super satisfied as far as the gameplay is concerned.
All right, I've got a huge backlog, so I won't put this in top priority. Then it sounds like.
No. Yeah, but that's all I've been playing. I'm going to dive into some other stuff. You know me, I'm just churning out games, feeling good. But what have you been playing lately?
Man, still chugging away at Persona 5. It's a long game. It's going to
It is.
be quite a while. I mean, at some point, I'm going to rotate something else in to kind of give me a break. But I was quite surprised playing this because the difficulty spike just ramped up. Like the first couple hours, it's a breeze. You're like, man, this is so casual. I'm just going to fly through this game. I'm going to relax. And then shortly after that, every battle I'm like fighting for my life. So, and there's a ton of strategy involved. You might luck out and end up with an enemy combo that you can easily take out, but there's also some enemy combos that you just, as soon as I run into them, I'm like, I'm dead. I might as well just restart. They're throwing 3 of the healing guys at me and 2 of the really tough guys at me. They're just healing each other and bashing me to death. Like, at that point, I just click there's like an automatic battle mode you can click. It just speeds it up and then it just does the battle for you. I'll just do that until I die and then start over and hope, either avoid that enemy or hope I get a different enemy set that I gotta face. Yeah,
It's a grind. Like you've got to put the hours into, like, kind of just like Ni no Kuni. Like, you have to get your levels up. You've got to be prepared for every palace, what they call in those, that like the dungeons that there is, because yeah, the bosses aren't easy. They aren't, and especially the final boss in that game. I took me a few tries, and I'm usually fairly decent at those games, but it was tough, but rewarding, I think, just because the whole game's a masterpiece to me.
Yeah. Well, off podcast, I might hit you up to get some pointers to maybe set me up for success later on in the game.
I think that'd be wise, because I don't want you to fall off because of it being difficult, or maybe there's something I can tell you, give you a tip that might open up some things for you.
Okay. All right, that is all I've been playing lately. So I think you and I have some interesting topics to cover. The first one being a question. This is for both of us. Gonna ask you first because I'm curious. So we've been talking a lot about new graphics cards coming out that NVIDIA has been releasing, and it seems like they're just turning these things out like every month. New graphics card. This one's 10 times better than the last one. This one's 10 times better than the last one. Like, how good do graphics cards need to be? I feel like it's getting ridiculous now. Does everything need to run at 8K, 240 frames per second? I don't know. But having said that, do you obsess about frame rate when you're playing games? And do you obsess about resolution? Do you have to play a game at 4K, 120 frames per second, or not? And if not, what is the lowest frame rate and resolution you can tolerate and still consider a game to be playable?
Yeah, this is a great topic, because it's a lot to think about for me, because I mean, as us, we've grown up with games from really crappy frame rate and resolution, but at the time we thought they were the best thing we've ever played. I think as time has gone on, I have gotten a little more picky as far as what I want with my games. I think it's more for like newer games that have come out. Like, I will still play older games in exactly the way they were made. Like, that doesn't bother me. I get picky when it comes to newer games. I know a lot of game franchises are really trying to prioritize graphics, but they also add a performance mode where like it'll shrink the graphics a little bit, and they'll boost the FPS. And that's what I want. I will always play a game in performance mode, and I will always choose frame rate over graphics.
Okay.
I want a smooth experience. What is good graphics if the gameplay is clunky,
Yeah.
So I think the lowest ideally I would do 1080p at 60 frames per second. I mean, I feel like that's just, I think it's almost the standard now. Like, the lowest standard is that lately. And I think that's really where I set the bar. But I'm definitely, especially with like shooters and things where like I want immediate, high frame rates, I'll definitely choose frame rate over resolution.
Okay.
What about you? I want to hear your thoughts.
So you bring up a good point that you and I grew up in an era where games ran horribly. The first thing that comes to mind is the Nintendo 64. So many of those games were, the frame rates were in the teens. Like, you're lucky if it's hitting 20 frames per second. Those games were slideshows, especially GoldenEye. Playing that split screen, like, that would bring the console to its knees. Like, you'd just be a freaking slideshow of you trying to face off with somebody else. But we loved it. We
Yeah, at
tolerated
the
it back
time,
then. I didn't even know what a
best
frame
thing.
rate was when the N64 was out. I was too young. I had no idea what that concept even meant. I definitely could tell that something was up. Like, okay, this game is a better experience. Don't really know why. And it would be because it has a higher frame rate. But also speaking on resolution, I mean I don't remember the N64 resolution, but I think most games were like 240 by something other pixels, like 320 by 240, which is crazy to think about. Like we're now at 4K, 8K graphics, and we used to play games at 320 pixels by 240 pixels.
Yeah, at that point, like we did, all I cared about at that point is how big my tube TV was. Like,
Yeah.
that I was like, I just want a big old tube TV so I can play this game
Play this blurry
as big as
ass
it could.
game
Yeah,
blown up
as
to the
stretched and
max.
blurry as it could be.
Yeah, but so having said that, I'm just like you. Like I can still go back to those games, and there's memories there. There's nostalgia. It's fine. That's how the game always was. Um, but nowadays, I I think you're a little pickier than me. So 720p is pretty blurry to me anymore. I know the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 era, even though most of those games said 1080p on the back of the case, most of them actually ran in 720p and they were just upscaling them to fit your 1080p screen. So that whole generation was like the 720p era or lower. Some of those games were even lower just to get them to run better. But nowadays, that looks pretty blurry to me. So I think the bare minimum resolution for me is 1080p. But I can tolerate a lower frame rate. I'll say, and this is because I play a lot of console gaming, I'll say that 30 frames per second is fine. And I know even modern games on console sometimes dip below that. I mean, if it dips below 30 frames per second for like a half a second every once in a while, it's not the end of the world. But I think my bottom line is 30 frames per second. Um, and then I do much prefer 60 frames per second, and then anything between I totally can tolerate. Like if I can squeeze a little more graphics out of a game or a little higher resolution, if it means I'm gonna be bouncing between 40 and 50 frames per second, that's fine. But I think it also comes down to the game too. If I'm
Yes,
playing something like Call of Duty, especially Call of Duty multiplayer, like yeah, it's got to be 60 frames per second or above. If I'm playing some
exactly.
role playing game or a turn based game, I don't really care what the frame rate is then because it's not like real time combat.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, but preferably, so yeah, 1080p, 30 frames per second or above. Although I do know people that absolutely obsess about frame rate and resolution, and it's like an insatiable appetite. It's like it's got to be top notch, or yeah, if it's not 120 frames per second, 4K, they're not even playing the game. They are not having a good time. They're like, I got to
Those are
update
the
my rig right this second.
Yeah,
And
those are the people NVIDIA loves because they're gonna turn out these graphics cards and those guys are in line.
yeah, they're the ones dishing out thousands of dollars for those new graphics cards. And I'm like, can you even visually see the difference between 60 frames per second and 120? I mean, maybe other people can. I'm getting old. My eyes aren't as good as they used to be, so I can't really
Right.
tell.
No, good topic though. Yeah, I think we're mostly on the same page.
Yeah. So Mitch, today I'm rocking a nice SpongeBob and SquarePants shirt, but I see
Nice.
you over there got you a brand new
Yeah.
crispy video game shirt. Is that what is that? Phoenix Wright?
Yes, that's Phoenix Wright and Miles Edgeworth, the two attorneys in the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney series. One of my favorite Capcom series, actually. I play the Ace Attorney trilogy on my Switch when I'm going to bed these days because it's just nice point and click adventure style, almost a visual novel like we talked about last week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I jumped on that site that you showed me and I took a look and I saw the Phoenix Wright stuff and I'm like, I gotta represent. I gotta get a shirt.
Nice. And yeah, in case you guys haven't seen the episode that he's referring to, I had gotten some cool Resident Evil gear from nerdkungfu.com. It's not a sponsorship in any form, just a cool place to get video game shirts, and they're pretty decent quality. Nerd Kung Fu, if you're watching and you want to sponsor us, hey, I'm cool with that. But if not, I still like your stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I might venture and buy some more. I saw a few others that I liked, but I wanted to at least pull the trigger on one.
Yeah, and I've heard of that series, but I've never played it. So, did it start on the 3DS or the 2DS? Is that where it originated?
I want to say it started on the DS, like
Okay.
the original DS. I'm not sure if it went back as far as any of the Game Boys or anything like that. I believe it was the DS because I owned the Phoenix Wright trilogy on DS, but then it came out on Switch, and I was like, I'd rather play it on Switch with my bigger screen and whatnot. And then there's also a new Ace Attorney game. There's the trilogy of Ace Attorney games, which are the originals with Phoenix Wright, but then there's a new one that doesn't. I don't think Phoenix Wright's in it. I think there's another, like a younger, up and coming attorney that's in the new one. So I'll eventually get to all of them done, but they're mostly my bedtime games, and I usually fall asleep within 20 minutes of playing.
I love those games. I love those chill, wind down games. And every time I've seen those games, I'm always like, what are these? Because, yeah, I read that you're an attorney, and like, how would you play a game where you're an attorney? And that also leads me to another question. How did you stumble across this game? Like, what did somebody recommend it to you? Because it seems like a strange game to choose to pick up. Like, how did you hear about it? What even got you to play that game?
Yeah, those are great questions, and honestly, so to start, the game itself, each chapter there's a trilogy of games that are all combined into one now, and then each has 5 chapters in them, I think, and you're solving some sort of case, and it's usually a murder in every chapter, and so you're basically going around talking to people, trying to piece together clues. So when you get into court, you have ammo to win the case and defeat the other attorney, who in this case, Miles Edgeworth, is usually the one who's the attorney in the first of the 3 games in the trilogy. And it's just a lot of they're goofy. I mean, it's not always like super serious. It's a lot of goofiness. Like Phoenix Wright's such an awkward guy, and they don't know how he's such a good attorney, but he keeps going in there and winning everything, even though he's constantly getting berated by the judge or the other attorney. So it's fun. But as far as how I got into them, I want to think. Usually, I've been deep into Reddit a lot. I think during that time, and I follow a lot of gaming subreddits. So I want to say probably some deals page where somebody advertised it and just said these games are fantastic, and I'm a quick sell, I mean, I'm a quick trigger as far as buying games. So
Yeah, me too.
I think
Don't feel
somebody just
bad.
hyped it up on a subreddit, and I went for it.
All right. Okay, cool. So, you and I are old enough to have been through the Nintendo 64 era. We are also old enough to have gone through the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube era. And when those consoles were new, I had an Xbox, I had a PlayStation 2, I had a GameCube twice for a very short period of time. And I know that you are a diehard GameCube fan. You had a GameCube back in the day, tons of games, a lot of nostalgia there for you. So just thinking back, I wanted us to kind of share some good GameCube memories. So for me, as I mentioned, I had a GameCube for a short period of time on 2 occasions. And at the time, I had a PlayStation 2 and an Xbox, and I looked at the GameCube, and I was like, there's some good games on here. Don't really need it right now, though. And then they released a remake to Resident Evil, the first game. And I was like, oh, crap. Looks like I got to buy a GameCube now because I'm not missing out on that. And for some reason, Capcom struck a deal with Nintendo to where the Resident Evil games would be exclusive to the GameCube, which is
Wild to think about.
baffling to me. It's a console with more family-friendly games. Meanwhile, you have a PlayStation 2, which has the biggest player base at the time, and an Xbox, which also has a huge player base. Why would you just completely have the games only come out on GameCube?
It's also the platform with the least amount of power compared to the three of them.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
true
the
as well.
Xbox and the PlayStation, I'm fairly sure had a lot more, you know, I guess the graphical peak
Yeah,
compared to, I guess, performance wise too, than the GameCube did.
yeah, definitely the Xbox at least.
Yeah.
Uh, so when this game released, I did in fact buy a GameCube just to play that game, and that is a beautiful game. When that came out, even though what you just said, the GameCube was not super powerful, Resident Evil looked amazing on that game, and it was so realistic looking, which in turn made it an extremely frightening game. That one was very scary. And this was back when Resident Evil was still just pure horror, which it's kind of circled back around to that. But there was a time when they were more action oriented.
Yeah, to go to your graphical points, I remember it vividly when I would come over to your house and I saw you playing that game. And I mean, it just spoke to the times, and now it's not a big deal, but then it was a huge deal. Just you looked in a mirror, like in, in the mansion that you were at or wherever you were, you're looking in the mirror and you can see your character's reflection as you would go in and out of the mirror. And I thought that was the coolest thing. Like obviously, like people don't think it's a big deal now with what we got going on now, but like then, like that was huge.
Yeah, it's crazy how much we take for granted now. Like the shadows we have in games, physics, reflections, all that stuff. That did not always exist. Yeah, that was a gorgeous game. I finished it, traded in the GameCube, traded in the game, and then sure enough, a little bit later, they come out with Resident Evil Zero, the sequel slash prequel. And I'm like, God, gotta buy a GameCube again. So I bought a GameCube again, beat that game, and then traded it all in. And then they released Resident Evil 2 and 3 on the GameCube, which I rented one time when I was staying at your house. And well, luckily, unluckily, they were just straight ports of the PlayStation 1 game. It wasn't like they were total remakes or a completely different experience. So once I realized, hey, these are just the PlayStation 1 games ported to GameCube, I was like, all right, I don't have to buy another GameCube to play through these again. Anyway, then they eventually released Resident Evil 4 on GameCube, and I think at that point I held out until the PlayStation 2 release came out. So I didn't end up buying yet another GameCube. But you played way more GameCube than me. You put me on to a lot of great games, including Animal Crossing. I think Lord of the Rings, Two Towers. I think you might have put me on to
Great
that
one.
game as well,
Yes, I did.
which I played on the GameCube. Uh, yeah, what's some games or what's a solid memory you have of that amazing console?
Yeah, game wise, I mean, God, there were so many bangers on there. I mean, Zelda the Wind Waker. I'm trying to think some other good ones. Sonic Heroes. I'm not sure if you remember that one, but that was a really good one that I remember on the GameCube. Obviously, Smash Bros, the Mario parties, any Mario game that they throw on there. I know Sunshine is not everybody's favorite Mario game, but I love Mario Sunshine.
Hmm.
But one of my favorite memories, though, yeah, it's fun. You mentioned Animal Crossing, and honestly, my memories with that game carry me to this day, and it is why I still play that franchise on my Switch now. Even, another one of my good bedtime games, going back to that. So, Second Cinema Video, you talked about renting games. Shout out to Second Cinema Video, that does not exist anymore, but it was where I would go with my dad to rent video games every weekend. I my dad got to the point where he was like, Mitch, we can't just keep buying you everything because you don't always play stuff. You play it, you play it for a couple days and then you never touch it again. So he's like, we're gonna do the renting and then we'll buy. I said, all right, it's fine. I went and rented Animal Crossing. I had no knowledge of Animal Crossing. It just looked like a cool cover, and I was like, all right, let's try it. I bring it home, and I realized how much content that game has, and I was addicted from the start. And I I went back and then rented it again through Second Cinema for like the 5 day instead of 2 days, and I'm like, all right, I gotta get a week of this game now. After the week goes by, I'm like, I want to do it again. I want to rent it again, and my dad's like, all right, Mitch, like, we'll buy it this time. We'll go ahead and buy it. And I'm like, all right, sweet. Because I would always have to start over my town because when you rent it, you never got the memory card that it came with when you buy it. So I never had enough space on my
Oh,
memory card
dang. Yeah.
to have the town permanently there. So I'd always start over every time I rented it. So he bought it for me, and I think he regrets buying it for me. And if he listened to this podcast, he would be yelling in his chair because he hated the game. Him and my stepmom hated the game because the voices that they make when they talk are really, really annoying.
Yeah.
And sometimes I would be in the front room because I wanted the bigger TV up in the front room, and I'd hook my GameCube up to it. And it would just be that little chitter chatter of them talking back and forth the whole time. And Beverly's like, you need to go downstairs, Mitch. And I'm like, but as far as like more, I don't know, that's a great memory for me, not as much for my parents. But with my friends, it would be so fun because you could have multiple people in your town. So you could have up to 4 friends also live in your town and have houses. So there'd be times where like, all right, we're gonna switch off. Like you get an hour, you get an hour, and like they'd all, make their homes, and we'd all like send like fake emails to each other. Or I guess like they had like snail mail that you could send to each other. So when the next person logged in, they could see the mail that the other person sent to them, and it's just us trolling against each other. So a lot of fun with that. And then like the most nostalgic thing with Animal Crossing, I could talk about it forever, is the fishing. The fishing is the most relaxing thing you can ever do in a video game. And it's basically what I do when I go to bed and I want to just play Animal Crossing, relax to something. I just fish on Animal Crossing. And I just remember with my friends, like if you caught a rare fish, we'd be like screaming at each other, like, we got a red snapper, let's go, because you could sell it to Tom Nook for 3,000 gold. Like,
Tom Nook. I didn't know they had that
yeah.
multiplayer feature where you could have multiple people in the same town.
In the same town, they couldn't play at the same time, but you would just like once you boot the game up, they ask you, "Oh, what's your name?" and then you just pick the name of the person that that you are.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
So
but
I know your dad hated that sound, because even to this day, when I came back to Peoria for Christmas, one of the recent times, yeah, your dad brought it up. I don't know how Animal Crossing got brought up, but he was like, "Man, I remember those annoying music and voices." So yeah, that's stuck with him all these years as well.
it really did. Yeah, it's something. It must have been really annoying to him if it stuck with him all these years.
Yeah, I don't remember it. I did play a lot of Animal Crossing, but I can't remember their voices, so I'll have to go back and watch some gameplay to see what
I
you're
couldn't even
talking
mimic the
about.
sound for you. It just wouldn't even sound right. So yeah, it's something you're gonna have to go back and check out.
Dang.
It's just as annoying today in the newer games though too. Though it's great.
So yeah, newer games, they've come out with some Animal Crossings since then. I have not played any other ones other than the original one on GameCube. Let's talk about sequels.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the best sequels. And I don't mean the third or fourth game in a franchise. I mean literally the second game in the franchise, the actual sequel. So I think our criteria should be games that were good on the initial release, but just completely stepped their game up and became phenomenal when their first sequel dropped. And of course, the first one that comes to my mind is Resident Evil 2. So I did play. I can't remember if I played these out of order, but I did play Resident Evil 1 at like 6 years old, which I don't know what I was doing playing Resident Evil at 6 years old. But I liked it. And then Resident Evil 2 came out, and I loved it. Resident Evil 2 really sucked you into the game. The story was on another level. It went from the whole game pretty much being in one location to, okay, now you are in a city. Although it did end up going back to one location because you end up going to the police station and then most of the game is there. But it took everything the first game did and just upped it. The first game had very few enemies. There was just a few different enemy variants, and almost all the zombies looked the same. Whereas in Resident Evil 2, there was all different kinds of zombies, and it was just a very, very huge upgrade. And also, the sequel was going to be something completely different. Capcom had built Resident Evil 2, and then when it was nearing completion, they didn't like the game they were making. So they scrapped that and completely started over. So thank you, Capcom, for doing that, because I guess you made the right judgment call, because the game you ultimately ended up making was a huge improvement over the first game.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. I mean, even now with the recent remakes that they came out with, people still even now rave about the second game in the series, and that the remake has just put it up there as one of the the best Resident Evil games of all time.
Yeah, and I can always go back to Resident Evil 2. I beat it multiple times throughout my life, and then when I found out they were doing a remake of Resident Evil 2, me and my buddy James went back and beat it again. And this was, I don't know, 2018, 2019. I don't remember what year the remake came out, but it still held up. We were still on the edge of our seats. We were still enjoying figuring out the very well thought out puzzles. And yeah, it's still a great experience.
Yeah, and even like the speedrunning community really took a hold of those games too. Like I watch a lot of Resident Evil speedrunners, and I mean, a lot of them played number two.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I've seen people do Resident Evil speed runs with just a knife. I'm like, how are you doing that? How are you beating these bosses with just the knife? Crazy, crazy speed runs. Yeah, so I got a couple more on the list. What about you, Mitch? Any sequels that just took the franchise to the next level?
Yeah, I know we're gonna have a little bit of debate on this one, but Halo 2 is my choice for one that just launched it. I know Halo 1 was a great game. It was very revolutionary in itself, um, for what it was on the Xbox console. But I feel like with Halo 2, they took everything that was great in Halo 1 and they expanded upon it, and just I don't know, it was perfect to me. I mean, I think more along the lines with the multiplayer is why I think it really is the best Halo game to me. That was revolutionary in itself with the matchmaking and actually being able to party up with friends, creating clans within the party system and playing against other clans. The four-player co-op. I know two was four-player co-op, wasn't it, or was it?
I don't think so.
Maybe it was only two actually.
Yeah.
But regardless, I think it's more. Maybe I'm being biased because of the memories that I've had with Halo 2 and how much how many hours I sunk into it personally. But I met some of my best friends in life through meeting them through Halo 2 and just random games, and I went to one of their wedding, and all the way out in Texas. I'm in their fantasy football league still, all because we bonded through the magic of Halo 2.
Nice.
I don't know. There's just no other game that captured the feeling that Halo 2 did for me, even when Halo 3 came out, and I loved that one as well. But I don't know. It may be. I want to hear your thoughts, but I mean, Halo 2 is definitely my pick.
So, yeah, this is definitely a good game. But I was actually massively disappointed in Halo 2 when it dropped.
Oh no.
So I loved Halo 1. I played that game to death. I played through the co-op with everybody that would play it with me. Every kid in the neighborhood went through Halo co-op with me at some point. I knew that campaign in and out. It did not have online multiplayer, which was the biggest, I would say, not let down, because Xbox Live really wasn't even coming into shape when Halo was being worked on. But I'd say it's the one thing that, yeah, Halo 2 definitely improved over the first one, because it really needed Xbox Live. But it doesn't mean I didn't play the multiplayer. The multiplayer was still very expansive, great maps, great weapons, great mods you could do to customize each match. And I played
One
that
of the
game.
greatest map making ever created in a game, in my opinion. I mean, they keep recycling those maps and bringing newer versions to all the newer games as well. Which I mean, they were just super. There's so much nostalgia with all those maps.
Yeah, man, there's just, yeah, iconic multiplayer maps. And I played that with my friends like crazy. We'd sit down, do 4 players split screen, and just play through the multiplayer. So anyway, of course, inevitably, Halo 2 was being worked on, and I was so hyped for this game. I would watch every video they released about it. I would look at every screenshot. I would download like high-res screenshots just to like admire the graphics, because they actually did really improve on the graphics. Halo 2 had some of the best looking graphics of any of the original Xbox games. I think it was one of the first Xbox games to have bump mapping, which really gave everything detail. So anyway, the game comes out. I get it at launch at good old Game Crazy, and I get it home, and I'm playing through the campaign. That's the first thing I do. Even though I had Xbox Live, I jumped right into the campaign. And I was enjoying it a lot. I was very blown away by the graphics. And the first couple levels of the campaign are great. And then the next day, I start the game over. I just played through the first couple levels. And the next day, I start the game over with one of my buddies, playing it in split screen. And after you get past those first couple levels, in my opinion, the campaign just takes a sharp turn downwards. Because then all of a sudden, they make you play as the Arbiter. They take away all the human guns, which to me are, in Halo 2 were the better guns. And then the levels just become really bland. They're huge and expansive, but very bland and very repetitive. And yeah, the campaign really let me down. And at the time, that was my favorite part about Halo, was the co-op campaign. So then I jump into the multiplayer. And in Halo 2, they took away the assault rifle and instead replaced it with the dual SMGs, which I'm like, you can add more guns to a game, but do not take guns away. The assault rifle was my bread and butter. And I wasn't a huge fan of the 3-round burst assault rifle. And then, this is the original game, my combo was always the assault rifle and then the sniper pistol. And then they totally nerfed the pistol to where it was basically useless. I'm like, you ruined the pistol, you took away the assault rifle. Oh, what the heck is this? So some of these things were disappointments, but it's not that Halo 2 was not an amazing game. Another issue was going on at the time. I was part of a clan in Return to Castle Wolfenstein, and Halo 2 was to be the game that we transitioned to. And at the time, we were all kind of having a falling out. We were getting older, spending less time playing games, getting out and doing other things. We were just kind of growing apart, and there was a rift going through the group. And we fell apart right around the launch of Halo 2. So in hindsight, I don't think that there was anything wrong with Halo 2, other than I probably had way too high expectations, because I basically put it on like a mythical pedestal, and me and all my buddies that I would play online with were slowly going our separate ways while we were all playing Halo 2, which probably just kind of soured my memories of the game. Although I've since gone back since they've released the anniversary edition, played through the campaign. Still think it's one of the weaker campaigns, but it's still a good game. And I've gone back to the multiplayer, and I'm just like, man, the multiplayer in Halo 2 is phenomenal. I wish I would have played it more. I wish I would have appreciated it more when it first released. Although, actually, not only did I play the multiplayer through the Anniversary Edition, but just about a year or two before the Anniversary Edition came out, I'd gotten a hold of a PC copy of Halo 2, and I was playing a ton of the multiplayer on the PC version. So I've since redeemed myself and gotten hours and hours and hours in on the Halo 2 multiplayer. So, anyway.
I want to go back to the part where you said, your friends were having a falling out, because I think what also maybe the standing that it has in my mind is higher maybe than you, is because my friend group was banding together at that
It's like,
time.
yeah, the opposite effect, huh?
Literally, we were all forming at that time, and that was when all of us were just getting Xbox Live. I was like begging my dad to get broadband internet so I could play Xbox Live. I'd go over to a friend's house, and I just saw that he's playing people from freaking China on Halo 2, and I'm like, this is insane. You're playing people from across the world? Like,
Yeah.
what? Like, and then I got the broadband internet. We got my friend John's dad to he was an electrician, and he ran one of those, a wired cables. I needed wired internet over wireless in the basement. He he hardwired a cord through our home to go into the basement. So it went all the way up from, remember where my computer room was up?
Yeah,
It went from the computer room down to the basement, and it just threw straight up through walls.
Nice. And
So
yeah, and for our younger viewers, today multiplayer gaming, online multiplayer gaming is just everywhere. But Halo 2 was kind of a pioneer in online gaming, especially with consoles. So a lot of things now, like lobbies and matchmaking and voice chat and all that stuff, really was perfected on console in Halo 2. And everyone else is, I mean, maybe they weren't the originators, but man, they really perfected it, and a lot of people have built off of that original system of Halo 2.
yeah, it's wild to think about, because like I said, we had a bunch of like friends that were just getting Xbox Live. We're all just getting off that dial-up internet into broadband. We're booting up, and we're like, guys, we can just party together, and we can just play games online together, and we don't even have to go over to each other's house anymore. This is wild. We're up until 4 a.m. as middle schoolers, just in custom lobbies doing the super bounces, which I thought was the coolest thing in Halo Online multiplayer.
What is
We're
a
like,
super
okay,
bounce?
guys.
I don't even know what that is.
So a super bounce in Halo is, they design these in games on every map, and we would always look up YouTube videos, and it's basically, if you would run, each super bounce was different, but if you did movements in a certain way, like there was one on Ascension. I don't know if you remember Ascension with the two towers. There's one smaller tower and one huge tower. But you could get on top of the huge tower and snipe down on people using a super jump. So essentially, you would like crouch into a wall, and you had to do it a specific way. So it was like you'd crouch into a wall, you turn around, and then you would just run up some stairs, and then you jump. And if you did it all within like the exact way that the YouTube video, I don't know who found these, said, your Spartan would bounce super high up into the air, and you could get on top of towers that you would never be able to get on top of.
Wow. That's probably unintentional. I don't think Bungie probably didn't put that in there on purpose, but I love when stuff like that gets discovered in games.
It was because I mean every map had like different ones like that, and I just don't know how people like came to finding them. But we would just look up YouTube videos, and there'd be sometimes 40 people in a custom lobby, and we're all just practicing trying to get out. There's sometimes you could get outside of the map, so like eventually there's a wall and you can't go past a certain point on the map. But some people found a way to like glitch through walls so you could get behind the map and hide in places where you would never be able to go originally.
Whoa. So I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but did that get patched out in the Anniversary Edition, or can you still do that in Halo 2 Anniversary?
It was patched out.
Man, of course. Dang.
Yeah, I think it was patched out in the Master Chief Collection too, because I know the Master Chief Collection brought over all 4 of the games on the same, one disc. And I mean, you could still play like original Halo 2, non-anniversary, non-remastered or anything, but even with that, I don't think the super jumps work.
Dang. All right, we've got some other sequels to cover, but I think we'll save that for a part 2 in our next episode.
Sounds good.
So we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you even more if you made it all the way to the end. You can find all of our episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube. Mitch, you want to let them know the rest of the areas they can find us on social media?
Absolutely. You can follow us on our Twitter, which is @HillsAreSilent, our Instagram, which is Instagram /HillsAreSilent. Our YouTube, as Mike mentioned, is @TheHillsAreSilent. And if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to our email inbox. It is hillsarsilent@gmail.com. We'll catch you on the next episode.